would be good.
Okay.
You have it. I am going to be recording this meeting tonight. If you see something cool you want to come back to later, we'll have much of this posted online. I'll probably have both a full version and a clipped version of Mike Johns' presentation. But again, thank you so much for being here and for being a part of our survey. You are what makes this work so incredible, and I really appreciate your time here tonight, your efforts all throughout the season, whatever you're doing, if you're on the beach, if you're doing organizing on a higher level, all of it's super important, and we're really grateful for all of you. So the goal of tonight is to get us all together, because we all live in all these different places. We've got folks that are, all the way up. And here's a good reminder. If you don't mind muting yourself, that would be great. Folks that haven't, if you're not actively speaking, muting yourself is great. But feel free to unmute if you do have a question. The whole point of tonight is to get us together. Got people from all the way down in Olympia, South Sound, all the way up to Whidbey. We've got a really spread out survey happening during the breeding season. We don't always get to communicate and interact with each other. So that's kind of the goal of this, and to celebrate a season well done. Everyone worked really hard this year to get out on the beach. It's really a thing worth celebrating. So thanks for being here. One last time, I'm going to remind everyone, if you can rename yourself, that's great. That way we kind of know who's who, where you're from, where you're surveying. And it looks like most people have done that. I've posted one more time in the chat how to do that if you have never renamed yourself on Zoom. But overall tonight, we're going to do some quick introductions of the various survey areas, because you might be familiar with the survey that you do where you are, but you might not realize that there's people in a different area of Washington doing the survey. So we're going to start with that, and we're going to have a brief data discussion on Whidbey. I believe, Dave, that's what you're mostly going to be talking about. And I think that can be taken in a couple different ways. I think to a large degree, it's aspirational. For those of us that haven't been doing the survey nearly as long as Whidbey, it shows you what a long data set can show us. So I'm really excited to see that. Afterwards, we're going to have a slideshow with photos and some video and even a poem from this season. So kind of sharing about what we've all been up to. And then we'll have Mike Johns' presentation on Pigeon Guillemots in another part of the world, which I'm really excited about. All right. So moving right into that. And feel free to also ask questions in the chat. If there's like a random question you have, please go for it. I'll try to keep an eye on it, but also there's other people that know as much or more than me in our group here, so we can collectively answer questions. That would be great. And all right. I'm going to really quickly find just 1 second. Okay. So let's start with introducing the survey areas. So Francis, would you mind introducing a little bit about surveys on Whidbey Island?
Sure, happy to. Hi, everybody. We here on Whidbey are into practically 2 decades worth of this survey. So it's really fun to keep going and see how this has grown over the years. We surveyed 24 colonies here on Whidbey this year, about 85 volunteers out on the beach. I should say 85 amazing volunteers out on the beach. And Dave will tell us exactly in a few minutes, but we have about usually about 1,000 birds that we survey here on the island. Thanks.
Oh, I was muted, sorry. How about Camino Island? Ellen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Thoreen, and I represent the Camino Pigeon Guillemot survey area. We have one colony that we have observed for our 3rd year now, and then we have 2 new ones identified that we will be adding to next year, thanks to some new volunteers. And we've grown from 3 volunteers to 13, and with the new ones coming on 15 next year. So we're growing and happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you. Exciting having seen Camino when I first started in this role grow. It's really, really exciting to see. Thanks for being here. All right. So our main organizer from Bainbridge, Cindy Holtz, is not here tonight, and I am introducing, but I'm not sure if there's anyone in the crowd here that feels like they want to step up for Bainbridge Island at all. And it's okay if not, I'm putting you on the spot. I will say they have 5 sites, and I know they have at least 12 volunteers. They also are one of the newer areas, started 3 years ago, I guess 4 at this point, but really happy to have them here as well. I'm hoping that we can push for expanding more into Kitsap Peninsula as well in the near future, but we'll see about that. All right, and then also, hi, I'm Brendan. I'm going to put on a different hat. I also work for the Vashon Nature Center here on Vashon Island where I live. And this year I ran our pretty small survey. We only have 2 sites. One was brand new this year, and one was a site that we've been surveying for a couple years. And then we also kind of have an unofficial site at the north end of our island. And we were unique this year in that we had 11 high school aged volunteers, interns, not volunteers, interns that were working with us doing the survey, with a little bit of me jumping in and helping. All right, South Sound.
Hey there, Terrence Lee, Science Director with Nisqually Reach Nature Center. So we're pretty excited that we've been doing these surveys for 10 years. We currently have, I believe, 16 colonies, if I did my counting correctly yesterday. And we have roughly 65 volunteers. That's been kind of our running average, is between 60 and 70 volunteers for this whole time period. So yeah.
Thanks, Terrence. All right. How about East Jefferson? Brenda, are you here amongst us? Thought I saw you.
Brenda, you're on mute.
Brenda, you're still muted.
Hi, everyone. We're in East Jefferson County on the west side of Hood Canal Bridge. In 2020, Mary Bond started surveying along Discovery Bay at 2 sites. And in 2021, I started surveying several other sites, but there were only 4 of us at the time. And in this year, we doubled our number of volunteers, and we have regularly surveyed 5 colonies with 8 regular surveyors every week and 4 at-large people who don't want to do regular surveys, but they're really good at spotting guillemots and cluing us into where other colonies might be. So we likely will be expanding our efforts this coming year as we learn more about where they are in Jefferson County.
Thanks, Brenda. Glad to have you here. Okay, and last but not least, out in Clallam County, saw Ed here.
Yes, Ed Bowlby for Clallam County. We started a pilot project back in 2015 and went full-fledged in 2016. And we've been monitoring ever since. And this year we had about 20 returning volunteers going for 9 sites, but we also had a bumper crop of brand new volunteers.
We lost you there.
I have a low bandwidth here, so sorry about that. Anyway, so this year we had a total of 40 volunteers with basically nine areas.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. I just think, yes, you know, I think when we're on the beach, we're kind of like, we're focused on really like the birds that we're looking at. And it's good to like get our heads high up in the sky and look at all the folks that are working across the region on our survey. All right. We're going to move right along to a bit of discussion about data with Dave Kraus, our expert here. Dave, what do you need from me?
I might not need anything. Let me see if I can share. I can, so great. I will.
Fantastic.
Somebody needs to mute themselves.
So welcome everybody. My name is Dave, and I live on Whidbey, and I mostly work for the Whidbey Breeding Survey, but I like looking at the data for everybody. And so for this little presentation, at this point we have 4 reporting regions. We have Camino and Kitsap and South Sound and Whidbey. And South Sound is still working on their data somewhat, so their results are preliminary, but I've used them anyway because they're such an important site. So this is 2022 season results. Brendan just took us through the 7 sites, but this shows kind of the durations that they've been doing the survey. I put 2008 for Whidbey Island because that's when our data set starts. But I think Francis was doing this as early as 2004, or maybe even earlier than that. So as you said, we're coming up on 2 decades here. Over here under study sites, there's that's a link to our Salish Sea Guillemot Network website. So I think this will probably be posted on the website, and you can, if you get to that website, you can click that link and go to the same website again. How nice. Anyway, it's really grown. You can see that we have 3 more regions since 2020, and we cover 9 counties around the Salish Sea. So it's really becoming a broad and important look at the Pigeon Guillemot species in Salish Sea. So how is what we do in this survey important scientifically? And I italicize scientifically because each of us has a lot of reasons for doing this survey. And my most important reason is to be able to spend an hour or 2 on the beach in the summer and just thoroughly enjoy being there. And I suspect that that's probably the main reason most of our volunteers are doing this, and that the scientific importance of our data is a byproduct of that. But the quality of data that we collect is paramount in keeping our survey important to the people that support this survey. So the Puget Sound Ecosystem Monitoring Program, PSEMP, has identified the Pigeon Guillemot as an indicator species in the Salish Sea. And that means that its conservation status, whether it's doing well or not doing so well, informs us about the health of the Salish Sea. And the following data we collect is important to being able to identify whether there are changes that are impacting the health of the Pigeon Guillemot. And that would then help us delve into, or scientists delve into, what might be going on, and maybe actually be able to do actions that support keeping the PG healthy. So they're interested in the overall PG population, and each survey does 3 Pigeon Guillemot counts, and from that information we determine the population of the PGs at each region. They are interested in the percentage of the PG population attempting to breed. If we see a Pigeon Guillemot go into a burrow, we consider that an active burrow and that there is a pair of Pigeon Guillemots attempting to breed. They're interested in the percentage of the PG population that produces chicks. If we see a Pigeon Guillemot go into a burrow with prey, we consider that a successful breeding, and we call that a chick burrow. In the numbers and types of prey that are delivered. And as you all know, we count whether it's a gunnel, a sculpin, or an udder when it goes into a burrow. Who uses our data? University of Washington. We've had a number of briefs from doctoral to master's students using our data, reporting on the results of their research. The PSEMP, as I mentioned, uses our data because it's Pigeon Guillemot's an indicator species, and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife uses our data, and it's included in the Marine Birds database. And also, they have respected the survey so much that they are now supporting us with our electronic tools of entering data and accessing data, storing data. So we've got a great partnership going with them. So this first chart here, and I really worked hard to limit the number of charts that I've got. So rather than killing you, I'll just hurt you with them. The first part of this, I'll just report on Camino, Kitsap, South Sound, and Whidbey, because that's who I have data for right now. When the other regions have been able to report, I'll pull all the data together and do some total analysis or results on the data. But this chart on the left shows the 4 important areas that show how the Pigeon Guillemot is doing. And it compares the 2021 results for the same regions with the 2022 results. And you see that things are looking pretty much like they did in 2021, that's good. You know, it appears that it's pretty much just another year in the life of the Pigeon Guillemot in the Salish Sea. There are a few decreases in PG population and in chick burrows, and those are probably those are due to the numbers in South Sound. And when they have fully certified their data, those numbers may change, but if not, it'll be interesting to look at what's going on down there that could potentially be reducing the numbers. Excuse me a minute. This table on the right-hand side here is just the data that fills the chart. So this one is this is how we measure breeding success, and the percent attempting to breed, as I said, are the number of entrances to burrows we see in individual burrows that are not carrying prey. And so about 45% of the Pigeon Guillemots this year, of the total population, we think we're attempting to breed, and that's pretty typical with past years. Between 40 and 45% of the PGs are attempting to breed. That is, they're looking for burrows and they're entering burrows. And then this set on the right, the percent successfully breeding, those are the ones that we actually see Pigeon Guillemots delivering prey to burrows. And so that is at about 25%, and down a little bit from 2021, but still very much like 2021 and very much like previous years. So here, the chart on the graph on the left compares 2021 to 2022 for these 4 regions, and the red line is 2022. So this is really typical. You kind of go out on the beach and nothing's happening. You see a bunch of Pigeon Guillemots in the water, and they're kind of flying around and they're maybe going to burrows, but no one's holding any prey. And you start wondering, man, something's different this year. This doesn't feel right. It's different than other years. And then they start delivering prey and things pick up, and you're craning your neck this way and that way because there's so much going on. And after you look at the data at the end of the year, you go, well, this year was just like all the other years. And it is one of the really, really cool things about doing this year after year is getting tuned into the cycle of the Pigeon Guillemots. The chart on the right-hand side uses Whidbey data. The green line is the average number of prey delivered for the last 7 years, not including 2022. And the red line is 2022. And I should have explained, but the weeks of the year are down here. The 22nd week of the year is around the end of May. And the 36th, the end of the 36th week is kind of the end of the first week of September. And the peak delivery period usually is right around here, week 29, week 30, somewhere in that area. And week 29 is, this year started on July 17th. The steepness of this curve shows how regular this is. If you had a really flat curve over here, it would just show that they were, they're just breeding whenever they wanted to. But this shows that they're really focused in on this part of the calendar. The rest of this is about Whidbey. And for those of you who have never looked at Whidbey Island, this is it. And there are 28 colonies. And this year we we regularly surveyed 24 of them, and we kind of peeked at a couple of others to see how they were doing. Some of these colonies wax and others wane, so we adjust our volunteers to cover the important areas and then peek at the others. This first chart, so this is our data set 2008 to 2022, and this chart just shows the Pigeon Guillemot population over that 15-year period. And it's been very steady, just over 1,000 birds, although the last 3 years we've had an increase, and we don't know why. The data just shows that we have had an increase, and maybe someone will take on what's going on. The next chart is the number of chick burrows over time, over the same period of 15 years. And you can see with your eye, looking at this, that the number of chick burrows have declined. And you just saw a chart that showed that the population has increased for the last 3 years, but it doesn't appear to really have had an impact on the number of chick burrows during that period. So there does appear to be kind of gradual decrease in the number of chick burrows, just a flat out decrease. It's not dramatic, but it appears to be happening. We've wondered if the available nesting areas on Whidbey Island could be a factor, because in the last couple of years, people have noticed some significant bluff slides that have destroyed previous nesting areas, burrows. So I think very possibly that could be a factor. This chart shows the top line is the number of Pigeon Guillemots at Whidbey Island attempting to breed, going into burrows without prey. The green line shows the number of Pigeon Guillemots actually breeding, going into burrows with prey. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's a dotted green line that kind of shows the trend here. And that slope is downwards. So again, not dramatic, but something to look at and something to monitor over the years to come. See if it's a perturbation or if there's something real there. This chart shows the type of prey that had been delivered at Whidbey Island over the years. And you'll see that for the first 8 years, probably the gunnel, the blue column, those were really predominant. And starting in 2016, 2017, we started having, relative to the gunnel deliveries, we started having more sculpin deliveries. And in 2019, in fact, the number of sculpin deliveries exceeded the number of gunnel deliveries. And I think it's generally felt that gunnels are more nutritious and probably a less dangerous food than sculpins, which, you know, have that really, really big head, and they're being fed to small birds. Although those of you who have been doing this for a while will have noted that early in the season, the prey that are being delivered are really tiny relative to the prey that are being delivered when the birds are almost ready to fledge. And I remember when unfortunately, it's not that long ago, when I hadn't been doing this very long, I noted this, and I and I asked Francis and Govinda Holtby, I said, the prey really seems small this year. And they were kind enough not to even tell me that, you know, well, you really haven't put 2 and 2 together. The birds are tiny too. So the adults know that they must give their chicks small food initially and gradually increase the size of the food as they grow. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but there it is. So that's what a gunnel looks like. That's what a sculpin looks like. This is a sculpin that a PG dropped on the way to the burrow. And one of our teams just kind of, they were rained on by the sculpin. So we took a picture of it. Just a few factoids here. Total prey deliveries this year were 815 compared to 809 in 2021 for these this is for the 4 regions that are reported. So you can see how it's truly amazing to me how repeatable this data is. You would think with all the volunteers doing this and all the sites were doing that, things would be all over the map, but they tend not to be. The season high for prey deliveries to a single burrow was 15 at 2 different burrows. Burrow 3 at Battle Point, 3 surveys, they had 15 deliveries to a single burrow. And, you know, when we get out on the beach, the birds are already delivering. When we leave the beach, they're still delivering. And I just wonder about, you know, what is the metabolism of these chicks? And how do the parents keep up with it? I think perhaps some of us know what a chick's diet is and how much they eat during a day, but I don't. But it seems almost infinite. So down here, the last 3 bullets here, those are just kind of amazing statistics about the survey. And this is just the 4 regions. 44 colonies surveyed, 496 surveys, and 3,564 volunteer hours. And that's totally impossible for any agency to do. So what we're doing and the data we're providing to Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, researchers at University of Washington and others is so valuable and impossible for them to get any other way. The takeaways from this, From the data, it appears that this was just another successful year for Pigeon Guillemots. Nothing, the data doesn't show anything dramatic or particularly worrisome. It's interesting that the number of chick burrows appears to be decreasing, but we'll see when we get all the data collected what actually happened. And that would be the greater reliance on sculpin is very interesting. But all in all, you know, charts and graphs, they raise questions when you look at the data, but they don't answer anything. And hopefully, you know, with this kind of data, it will raise questions and it will provide opportunities for people to get some answers. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave. That was excellent, as always. We're so lucky to have you, that you want to dig into this stuff. It's great. There's a few questions, but I want to get us continuing to move along. So if you do have questions, we can get them to Dave. We can figure out a way to, you can even ask them in the chat, and if he feels like digging into them.
Yeah, I'll answer them in the chat if I can, Brandon.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, like Dave said, a lot of questions that are kind of, we don't really have the answers for. We're collecting this information in the hopes to answer questions, but also to monitor these birds. So thanks everyone for all the great questions. All right, so I'm going to now jump into our slideshow, and we're going to have a variety of voices here. A few different people shared some great photos, some great stories, and I'm going to share that with you in just 1 second. All right, can everyone see that? I guess if I can't see you, it's hard for me to know if I'm getting an affirmative or not.
Yes.
Great, thank you. All right, so this is just a photo I took a while ago. Not that exciting, but I needed something as a masthead. So we're going to start with some stuff from folks at the Nisqually Reach Nature Center running surveys in South Sound. And I'm going to ask them to step up and tell us what we've got going on there in these photos. I see some smiling faces and a couple interns.
Yeah, we really couldn't have done all that we did this past summer without the help of our 2 research interns. We have Marilyn on the left in the back of the boat there. And then we have John, our other intern. And then we have Alan Acosta, who's one of our volunteer boat captains. Some of you are probably wondering, well, why do you guys do boat surveys? Well, we have some challenges in access to some of our locations, particularly during high tides with a lot of either woody debris on the beach or other obstructions. So we find that boats are a nice way to get out and have everything in front of you as well. So next slide.
This is one of our photographers. Shannon is with us this evening, and Shannon has just provided us with a multitude of wonderful photos, and she also does the bird surveys. So you see her shooting pictures and doing the bird surveys. Next slide.
This is one of our island volunteers. So that picture of the folks in the boat, that was from one of our island colonies. And so we're fortunate to have Tim here as one of our regulars, and it's pretty clear that he's gotten pretty cozy with the Pigeon Guillemots as well. So always good to have local residents involved.
One of the colonies that was challenging this year, we have a couple of people from it, Edgewater, and Maria and Susan are both with us tonight, and maybe more. And they ended up having to do a lot from canoes and kayaks because of access and other issues, but it made it possible for them to survey on the same day all the time. They didn't have to bump the day due to tide. That's why. And this is on that team. This is Susan Morgan, who's with us tonight. And in a while, we're going to be showing the journal type map that she made that we're going to come to. And that was really a great contribution. So,
It's the next slide.
Oh, okay. Now I'm going to let Maria and Susan talk a little bit about this, but this is like an over-the-top colony map. So you might want to zoom in some also. Go ahead, Maria and Susan.
Hi, Susan, do you want to tell about your artwork, or do you want me to introduce you?
Well, I was pretty lost about where these burrows were, and I just thought, you know what, if I just start mapping them out, maybe I'll actually be able to keep them straight, because there were so many. And Maria and I spent a lot of time walking the shoreline and eventually figured out what landmarks to identify the burrows. And the map is evolving. It will change again. I'm going to be updating it as we go into this winter and next spring, I'm sure.
And then John, maybe you could tell how it was used on the coordination end. It looks like you added digitally, or someone did, to let us know what the current active burrows were.
Yeah, so again, we didn't really have to do much digitally to this because Susan was so thorough in her markings on it. But you can see just some of the stuff that we put in, like where some burrows potentially could be, or some markings that they found that we just put in so we could get this map out to anybody at that site, because this is a huge site and there were a lot of volunteers and stuff that would get shuffled in order to make sure we got the site, covered on the weekly. And we can thank Maria for that. She did a wonderful job coordinating all that stuff. But yeah, again, most of the work was done by Susan, and we didn't really have to do much editing to this, for sure.
Yeah, I'll just add, for anyone who wants to do this, we use, well, never mind.
Oh no, it's still there. It's fine. Go for it.
I'm kidding. We had Susan's space map, the beautiful artwork that was literally probably 6 to 8 weeks of work, because believe it or not, trying to keep track of this many burrows was really challenging, at least to label them. But then we put it in PowerPoint, and then every week we would just mark in the PowerPoint, update which burrows were active, which ones ended up being kingfisher burrows. So we just used the base map and then updated it every week. So that it worked out really, really well for our team this summer with so many active burrows.
So I'd like to add that one thing, if you look at this, to those of you who don't know this map, we have sections of beach. So we had section A to B up top, section B,
Thank you. Have a good one.
and then section C to D, and then D at the very bottom at the end ended up being an active site, which I guess hadn't been for a few years. So I included that little section as well, because there were a couple burrows there too. But so it's 3 parts. It was actually one long map at one point, and trying to fit it onto one piece of paper so you could have 3 different sections of the beach was kind of how it ended up being laid out most easily.
All right, thank you. It's a beautiful map. Got a few more things from South Sound.
Shannon took this photo. Shannon, what's that bird holding?
Well, my thought was that it was a prawn, but I think it's inconclusive. So we couldn't quite get a good enough look at it. It was low light. And but we've seen at this particular site 2 different types, shrimp-like prey. And so this one, we weren't quite sure, but it looks like a prawn to me. There's some debate on that.
Yeah, I don't know if this is from the same encounter or not, but
yeah.
I included another
That was
one.
the very next week, a bird arrived with this prey. And unfortunately, we didn't get to see it deliver. So we're not sure if it went to the same burrow. We were curious if it was the same bird that just had a taste for shrimp. We don't know. But I think this is a coonstripe shrimp, this one here.
Thanks. We've got a video. We probably won't watch the entire thing because we're running a bit late now, but I'm going to play it for a second.
This is a video that Mary Bertram, who's here tonight, one of our volunteers, compiled. We've been really fortunate to have her assisting with surveys because we've never gotten footage of this nature before. So it's really cool to kind of see these close-ups of fish deliveries that otherwise are just kind of a blur. So we weren't able to identify every single fish in each one of these frames, but it does give a different perspective on what we typically see from the beach.
And also the tight quarters with 2 different birds trying to come in and out and turn around in here. It's quite a small space, I think.
Yeah, it's great. You know, when you're surveying, you're like really focused on some specifics, and you don't really get to just watch this happen nearly as much. All right, there we go. This is a photo from Ellen on Camino. Ellen, I don't know if you need to say anything about it, but I think it speaks for itself. It's being out on the beach, doing a survey.
Yeah, I just call this the surveyor. I like the way it embodies the sense of quietude that overtakes us while we're surveying. That's my husband.
Another nice shot.
And that I call the gift of unexpected wonders, because it was week 14 and we knew not much would be going on. And in fact, we only saw one, maybe Pigeon Guillemot, but boy, what a reward this was.
It's beautiful.
Next.
All right.
This is Daniel.
So hi, my pictures are really from 2 dates. This one is June 15th. Oh, sorry, no, this is from actually May 31st, I believe it was, before the survey began. And most of the pictures I contributed are from that specific date because we weren't surveying and I was just being introduced as a new volunteer to the process. I brought my gear along in the event there might be some birds, and there were lots of birds. So it was a real fun experience for all of us to see them. So this is just one example. And everybody knows how fun it is to watch them try to take off and to land. So that's what we see. So next.
Yeah. And Daniel, I didn't include every single photo.
Okay.
So there's just a selection.
Okay, no problem. And, you know, this is again from the, staking the place out in the first case. Brought a long lens, and actually I have some video footage that I didn't contribute for this that was wonderful, and later on in the season also got some food deliveries on video, but this is just what we see. Next. This was a fun one here. On the left-hand side, the blurry bird, the first bird to arrive on this log, approached it, sat down, looked over at its mate, made eye contact, and then started to poke on the log with its beak to its mate to say, come on, get up here. And very shortly after that, the mate hopped up onto it. And next thing you knew, a whole bunch of others thought it looked like a fun place to hang out. Next. And this was from my actually third survey outing, and might have been one of the first occasions that I happened to see a bird about to head into the burrow I was monitoring with some prey. Next.
That was what we had. Thanks so much, Daniel. Those are wonderful. Hillary, I saw you in the chat.
Yeah, hi there. So yeah, I think like so many folks, I got so excited. This is my first year involved with the project, and I got so excited as a photographer just getting to hang out on beaches and experience the birds week after week after week. It was just a really fantastic way to spend the summer. I took my camera to the beach, not on days that we did surveys, but at other times, because I didn't want to be distracted by the survey work itself. And so I found myself spending hours on the beaches at other times just to watch the birds. I took this picture, or contributed this picture, just because I really like it. I love how they dance across the water, and yeah, they're great to watch. So next photo.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one I contributed. We named this bird Nervous Nellie. My site partner and I, Janet, we nicknamed our birds, we nicknamed our burrows. This is the eyebrow hole, the eyebrow burrow. And this bird is named Nervous Nellie because we watched it on more than one occasion make multiple attempts, like 5 or 6 times in a row, attempt to deliver to a burrow. And in this case, the bird flew to a burrow and then left still with the gunnel in its beak. And we were curious about whether or not we were somehow influencing their behavior, but we saw the same bird at the same burrow on more than one occasion. This burrow actually, earlier in the survey, someone was talking about 15 visits in the course of a survey. This burrow, we had 8 visits in the course of an hour. So I'm not sure if that's exceptionally high, but that was a high count for all of our burrows. So yeah, that's the eyebrow hole, and that's a Nervous Nellie. Next. And Janet or Brenda, you can chime in wherever. This photo was taken when Brenda joined Janet and me, not during a survey, but just to kind of re-walk through our survey site, because it was such a long bluff on Indian Island in Jefferson County that Janet and I couldn't see the whole thing between our 2 spots. Janet and I would come and survey during the same hour. And on the particular day that Brenda came and joined us to figure out how we wanted to divide up the site, for whatever reason, there was a ton of activity on the bluff. And I think we counted at one point as many as 13 Pigeon Guillemots all gathered together on this one site. They hung out here for a while and they flew over and they joined another site. None of them were making deliveries. They were just like kind of having a party. So it was fun to get to see that and be there to photograph it.
And it was the party palace.
Yeah, party palace.
I think this was the week when we saw influxes of large numbers of birds at this site and at the Fort Flagler site on Killisset Harbor. And it was almost like the non-breeding subadult contingent showed up all of a sudden. And it was really striking to us how many birds we gained in that week.
Yeah, it was like a frat party.
Yeah.
Next photo. The one on the left I just included because I liked it. The one on the right I included because it's I believe a first season fledgling.
Awesome. That's what I included. Thanks so much, Hillary. These are wonderful photos. All right. Moving on. We have a poem that's being read by Debbie for Kelly Jo and a few photos.
Hey, so Kelly Jo is one of 5 surveyors at Ledgewood Colony, which is a pretty large colony on the west side of Whidbey Island, just kind of south of Coopville. So this is Kelly's wonderful poem about surveying the guillemots, and that's the title. As they fly and circle around, cute little seabirds make a whistling sound. Survey crews watch and jot it all down as they fly and circle around. Black as night with bright red feet. Gunnel delivered, missions complete. Fledglings will fledge far out to sea, black as night with bright red feet. Cute little seabirds, my new friends. Data is entered, surveys now end. All is still till we meet again. Cute little seabirds, my new friends. The end.
Few more photos from Kelly Jo.
Very fun poem, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks for contributing that. This is a multimedia experience. All right, and we're going to finish up with photos from LAC. And these are all photos. Lackland has given us so many amazing photos. But these are some great images of some various birds in not breeding plumage. It's almost a bit of a quiz, and Leck and others from Whidbey sounded like there are a few folks that wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I can help a little bit on some.
Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Oh, we've had a lot of questions here on Whidbey as to what are the juveniles, what do they look like, what do the non-breeding birds look like. So I asked Locke if he would gather some of his photos that kind of show alternate or different plumage than the breeding plumage that we're so used to seeing. So this here, this first image is just a good old adult in non-breeding plumage. You can see the characteristic black wing patch with a white, black wing with a white patch on it. Kind of gray on the head, and probably will be turning whiter in as the winter goes on with this bird. I think this bird was from November. Next one. Yeah, here, these are really interesting, particularly that one on the left. You can see how the molt pattern is developing. So this would be a bird. This was in January, I believe this picture was taken. This bird is moving into its breeding plumage. And you can see with the head on the bird on the left, how dramatically that black kind of moves down the neck and onto the body as that dark plumage takes over the bird. These are both adults, maybe first year birds, but you can see the very strong white wing pattern with that black notch in it. The adult birds will be breeding, molting, excuse me, in pretty quick time periods, both in the fall and the spring. And since these photos were taken in the winter, January, likely they are the first year birds or subadult, maybe second year birds. Next one. Okay, here's a kind of an interesting one. Again, this bird photograph, I believe, was in January. Oh no, I'm sorry. This one was taken in May, and you see a lot of brown there on the wings. So this is likely a first year breed molting bird. It's not following that very dramatic, quick change of the adults. Since it's in May, clearly the adults would already be in full breeding plumage, and this guy's still in the process of molting. Kind of an interesting breast pattern there with that black and white, so dramatic. Next. Okay, this one really stumped me, Locke. The date on this is June 4th. Okay, this clearly can't be a breeding adult. It's got mottled brown and doesn't have a wing pattern and so forth. June 4th seems like it would be way too early for this year's juvenile. And also looking at prey, the way that the bird has brought the prey to the surface, that's very typical juvenile behavior. So I don't know, I think I'm gonna have to go with a really early breeding bird, and this would be a juvenile then, although you really stumped me here. Next photo. Okay, so here is a really good example of what a juvenile looks like shortly after it's left the burrow. You can see the head is very dusky, and if you can look there on the wings, they're kind of folded in on the back, but it doesn't show any clear white wing pattern. It has sort of a molted pattern with brown and white on the wings. So this is what we're looking for in you know, late July, August into September when the juveniles for that year fledge. Hey, Locke, thanks a lot for these amazing pictures. We could do a whole class on this sometime.
Oh, you're welcome.
Changes in the breeding, molting.
Yeah, thanks so much. They're great. I threw one more in that Dave Kraus sent us from the colony that he surveys at North Fort Casey. He said they counted 10 juveniles in the water, and this one was having a particularly successful time fishing. Yeah, and that looks like maybe like a starry flounder or something, like a young starry flounder. That's a guess, but yeah. Thank you so much to everyone who contributed to this. I think it's really just awesome to see all the amazing photos and experiences. Like Dave said at the end of I can't remember when he said it, but anyway, the point is, it's part of the reason that we're out there doing the survey is to just enjoy our time, and seeing that all come together, and what you all shared is amazing. We are certainly behind time, but we're gonna move ahead, and Mike, I'm pretty sure I saw you here. I hope you're here by now.
I'm here.
I'm ready to have you join us. Thanks so much for being here. Let me unshare so you can start sharing yourself.
Let's see. Are we looking good there?
Looks good to me.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for all those awesome photos and for presenting the data. I'm new to the area, so it's fun to see this community and to get to know you virtually at least. Thanks for inviting me to give a little guest talk here. I'll just jump right into it. So yeah, I'm Mike Johns. I'm a researcher with Point Blue Conservation Science, which is a nonprofit based out of California, which some of you may have known. It's formerly known as Point Reyes Bird Observatory. So we went through a name change in 2012. But I'm going to talk to you about the pigeon guillemots that we have on the Farallon Islands, some historic trends that we've discovered, and then some new insights we're gaining from some of the tagging work we've been doing. So, contents of the talk, I'll just, like I said, pretty much all like I just said, introduce the Farallones, talk about some long-term monitoring work, and then talk about some tagging studies. So Southeast Farallon Island is located approximately 26 miles off the coast of San Francisco. So it's actually an archipelago of roughly 3 islands. There's North Farallon, Middle Farallon, and South Farallon. Southeast Farallon is by far the largest of the group, and we call it SEFI for short. It's part of the Farallon Islands National Wildlife Refuge, so it's managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Point Blue is simply tasked with conducting the research on the island. So this is a photo of the Farallones during the summer. What it looks like, all the vegetation is now gone. It's very dry, and we've got a humpback whale fluking up in the foreground for good measure. This is what it looks like in the summer, or in the winter, sorry, with the Farallon weed, an endemic plant to the island that covers most of the available territory. So the Farallones are located right along the edge of the continental shelf break, and it makes it a really productive region. We have some really persistent winds in the spring, some northwest winds that force the surface water offshore, and that water is replaced by very deep nutrient-rich water. And when those nutrients hit the surface, they ignite these phytoplankton blooms. We get a lot of productivity happening. That works its way up to things like copepods and krill, and eventually the marine predators like seabirds and whales. So here we have a humpback again, gorging itself on some anchovy. And just a bit of history on the island. So the Farallones were occupied sometime in the mid 1800s. There were these things called the egg wars that happened out there. So San Francisco was lacking in chickens, and they harvested murre eggs from the island to supply all the bakers and needs of the city. So a lighthouse was established on the island in 1855, and that's when these dwellings were built to house the lighthouse keepers' families. And these are the same buildings that we use today. We've renovated these houses, and we now use them as a field site. And yeah, Point Blue established a field station in 1968, so a pretty long running time on the island. And we've contained a continuous presence on the island ever since. So we have personnel and staff that are living on the island year round. We break it up into 3 different seasons. So we have a winter pinniped monitoring season, a summer seabird season, and then a fall landbird migration study. So constant presence since 1968, pretty incredible for a nonprofit. It's difficult to get on the island. I love this photo of this woman being lifted on a chair from a supply vessel, and she's going to be dropped on a skiff taken out to be dropped off on the island. We have a similar setup. We don't use chairs anymore, but here we are launching a Zodiac into one of the gulches to take out to one of the supply vessels. So we have a fixed crane on the island that we use to do this. Okay, so getting into the seabirds. So there's roughly 13 species of seabirds that we monitor out there. This is just a snapshot of the core species that we follow. So we've got tufted puffins, Brandt's cormorants, rhinoceros auklet, western gull, Cassin's auklet, common murre, ashy storm petrel, and then our beloved Pigeon Guillemot down here in the lower right. And the projects have been pretty consistent throughout the years. The methods have stayed the same. So here's a photo of an anonymous researcher in 1968 weighing a Cassin's auklet over a bucket with the Piscola scale. And here we are present day, basically doing the same thing. So over 54 years now of continuous seabird monitoring data. And in terms of the Pigeon Guillemots, which we call pigus, so here we are, here's their range on the Eastern Pacific from Southern California up to the Bering Strait and along the Aleutian Islands, and this red circle is the Farallones. So on the Farallones, the pigus breed mostly on the steep, sort of deteriorating granite slopes. There's a lot of boulders and crevices for them to tuck underneath, lots of cracks in the granite that they utilize. They compete with Cassins out there, so there's roughly 30,000 Cassin's auklets that breed a bit earlier than the pigus do, and so there's a bit of overlap in terms of breeding habitat between those two species. Recently, there's probably about 3,000 breeding individuals on this very small island, so it's a pretty busy place in the summer. You hear the pigus calls basically everywhere. It's a constant chorus throughout the breeding season, so it's pretty fun for pigus lovers. It's a pretty awesome place to be. They're everywhere. The only predator they have on the island are the western gulls. So it's the largest population of western gulls. There's probably 12,000 western gulls on the island. And so they will definitely kill whatever enters their territory. And when the fledglings are leaving in the fall, a lot of them will get picked off by those western gulls. So getting into the details of the monitoring. So we follow roughly 90 crevices and artificial nest boxes each season for breeding success and for timing. To track the population, we simply go up to the lighthouse, which is about 300 feet high, and then with the scope, just scan the surrounding waters and count all the large rafts of guillemots that form in the spring. And then we have our diet studies. So you guys are all familiar with this. We're just tracking birds as they fly in with a bill load of fish or a single fish, and then we're identifying its, IDing it and getting a size estimate as well. In terms of the monitoring for reproduction, so that happens between April and September, which is their breeding season out there. This is a photo of some of our assistants scrambling up Lighthouse Hill. We spray paint or hand paint all the crevices that we follow with numbers, and then we scan these sites during chick provisioning to get at diet as well. So they're just going around and checking these breeding sites. They're checked every 5 days in the afternoon to avoid adult disturbance. The adults tend to not be present in the afternoon when they first lay their eggs. We weigh the chicks every 5 days to track growth throughout the chick growth period. And then when the chicks reach mostly feathered, we'll put a metal band on their right tarsus. So we want to track longevity and also maybe get recovery rates from birds that are found dead in other places. So just looking at some of the data, I do have some graphs to show you. So this is just our long-term data set for mean number of chicks that are fledged per pair. And you can see, which is a good sign, over the past 50 or so years, we don't really see much of a trend in breeding success, either up or down. So it's good to see the population's not declining in some way in terms of breeding success. So this just shows the annual variability. It kind of hovers around 0.8 chicks per pair. As we know, these Pigeon Guillemots can lay up to 2 eggs, and generally that second chick is more of an insurance policy. So on a really good year, they might fledge 2 chicks, but generally that second chick ends up dying. So some of the poor years are noteworthy, like we had the 97, 98 El Nino where we had pretty low productivity, and then this 2005 through 2007 warm event where we had some pretty low productivity too. So that's highlighted in the breeding data. Another complicated figure, I suppose, but this is the median lay date for the first egg over time. That's this black line here. And then the colored tiles are just showing you the total number of pairs that laid that first egg in this date. So if you have a warmer tile, that means there's more birds that laid their eggs during that period. And I show this figure just to say that in the last couple of years, we had the earliest lay dates on record, earlier than we've ever seen before. And there's some internal debate as to whether or not this is going to be a long-term trend or not. So stay tuned for the next 50 years. We'll see if they start breeding earlier on the island. And this is just our annual raft count. So this is the high count for rafts around the island in the spring, and we use this as a proxy for the population size. So you can see it got up to nearly 5,000 birds in the mid 2000s, and then it's been or around 2014, and it's kind of slowly dropped, but this is probably just a lot of observer error and that sort of thing. So it's hard to say if the population is actually declining currently, but it's most likely remain stable around 3,000 birds. Sorry if my mouse is making weird sounds. I'm trying to stop that with water. Okay, and then chick provisioning diet. So we do these surveys every morning, every 3 days when they're provisioning their chicks from 7 to 11. So we're tracking the birds as they fly in with binoculars, and we're noting while in flight the species, the size of that prey, if the bird's banded or not, and then what site it goes to. So that way we can link diet information with breeding success of these followed sites. So we usually have 2 observers watching the birds come in and then 1 data recorder. This is just a group outing in this photo of people being trained. And the resolution's a bit poor on this, but this is our annual proportion of chick diet throughout the years. And similar to what you all see here, sculpin are showcased quite a bit in their diets, but generally these birds are targeting juvenile rockfish. It's one of the most important prey items for seabirds on the Farallones. We see that in the murre diet and the cormorant diet and the auklet diet and the pigus as well. And when the rockfish aren't around, they're going after mostly flatfish and sculpin. They take gunnel and brotula and things like that occasionally, but those are the 3 main prey types we see. And this is just a pitch for any potential, if you know any grad students or potential grad students out there, it's a low-hanging fruit, just trying to figure out how important rockfish is to the diet of these pigeon guillemots, this population. There's a pretty strong relationship between rockfish and sculpin. So when, like I said, when rockfish aren't around, they're targeting sculpin instead. Rockfish are probably more energetically important to them than sculpin are. So anyways, if you know any budding grad students out there, let me know. Okay, so in the new studies, I'll just touch base on some of these new results we've got from the tagging work we've been doing. And I think Scott Pearson may have presented some of this stuff last year, but so this might be a repeat a little bit. But so there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence that our population comes up here in the winter time. We have a few band recoveries from dead animals in Washington State and British Columbia. There's a pulse of migrating birds that appear off the Washington coast in the spring and fall. So, and there's an absence of guillemots in California during the non-breeding period. So it's always been assumed that they do this migration, but we wanted to actually show it with tags. So this is a photo on the right of a cassins wearing what are called geolocators. It's attached to a plastic band that we then adhere to the bird's tarsus or wrap around the bird's tarsus. I don't have a photo of a guillemot, so this will have to suffice. This will do. So these devices, they record ambient light level. They have a battery life that lasts up to 2 years. But the sad thing is they have to be retrieved to get the data back. So that makes it a challenge. And we deployed a total of 90 devices between 2017 and 2019, so 30 tags per year. And we're able to recover 67 of those 90, which I think is a success. Not bad for a tagging study. The main reason that the success was not higher was because of the Western gulls. So for those of you who are familiar with Western gulls, they're very aggressive and they're very loud. And when you have 13,000 of them, basically sneaking up on a pigeon guillemot is virtually impossible because they sound the alarm every time we approach. So the guillemots are cued in on the gulls. They know if there's danger around and they'll flee their crevices if they hear us coming. So Western gulls are always a problem. Here's just a quick anatomy of what a geolocator is. So we've got a memory chip. Here we have a little light sensor, a battery pack underneath, and these 2 little metal prongs, which are used to both detect whether or not the tag is submerged in water, and also you can hook up a cable to these to uplink to the computer. And this one actually had one of the tags we recovered had a barnacle growing on it, which shows you how much time these guillemots are spending in the water during the winter time. Pretty much all of their time, essentially. And a quick schematic on how this works. So the geolocators, it's not like a GPS unit. It doesn't just give us a latitude and longitude. It's just passively recording the light values that the tag's exposed to. So this cartoon bird is, it's no light right here. It's experiencing a sunrise event. So the light values jump up, it goes about its day, the sun goes back down. And so we can use basically the timing of these twilight events, these sunrise and sunset events, to estimate roughly where the bird is on the globe. So when those events happen and how long they're spaced apart will tell you latitude and longitude. And I won't go into detail about that. I had some slides, but I took those out. Just if you have any questions, you can ask later. But so here's the results from that study. So basically, these are called kernel density plots. So if you see warmer colors, that means there are more points in that area. The cooler colors are fewer points. So in September, we see the birds are departing Cephei here and flying basically on a migration along the coastline up to Haida Gwaii. In November, we see they're leaving Haida Gwaii and finding some residency locations in Southeast Alaska and British Columbia, and they're still there in January. And by March, most of the tag birds have departed the area and have begun their migration south again back to the Farallones. And I think you may have seen an animation of this that's somewhere along the lines as well. I didn't include that, but so that's their annual cycle. Pretty cool. We didn't know this before this study, so it's pretty exciting to get some actual conclusive evidence of their migration. This breaks it down in a different way per year. So just walk you through these plots. The bubbles, they're colored by the month that the bird arrived at that location. And then the size of the bubble indicates roughly how many days they spent there. So a bigger bubble is more days spent at that spot. And then a purple bubble, for example, is a bird that arrived in October. Actually, I can't see the legend because this thing's blocking me, but I think that's right. And we found that they had 2 stationary periods during their non-breeding period on average. And the first stationary period, they arrived there sometime in early September and stayed for roughly 45 days. And those tended to be around Haida Gwaii. The second stationary period was, they usually arrived around November and then stayed for roughly 131 days. So that's their longer winter residency locations further north in northern BC and Southeast Alaska. So a couple more graphs. So another way to look at this is we wanted to look at their timing along the migration. So let me just go back here. These A, B, C, D, these are, I call these benchmark latitudes that we were interested in. So those are reflected down here. This is Cephei, Puget Sound, Queen Charlotte Sound entrance, Dixon entrance, and Admiralty Island. So these are increasing latitudes as you go up. And broken up they're colored by the tagging year. So you can see the birds are leaving the Farallones roughly around August 26th on average. And they're making this pretty much continuous flight until they get just past Queen Charlotte Sound. And then there's a gap before they arrive at Dixon entrance. So that's that first stationary period that's happening sometime in late September, early October. And that happens to overlap when we assume these birds are going through their pre-basic molt. So when they're molting all of their flight feathers and they're rendered flightless for a brief period of time. So it seems that this location around Haida Gwaii is an important molting area for this population. And for those of you who are familiar with the area, which you probably are because you're around here, Hecate Strait, I think is how you pronounce it, is a pretty shallow region that might provide some good foraging habitat for these birds, where they can still, be far enough away from shore to avoid shore-based predators, but still have access to shallow benthic foraging. So yeah, there's a longer delay that happens during their fall migration north, and in the spring, it seems like they're making pretty much a continuous flight back to the island. So they're not really stopping much on their way south once they wrap up their pre-alternate molt when they're coming back into breeding plumage. So that fall migration takes about 49 days on average, and the spring migration takes about 24 days. So much quicker coming back. They're excited to get back to breeding, it seems. And Maria, I think you're on the phone somewhere. You sent me an email asking, if we know roughly how long they're flying per day. And I didn't really dive into that too much. I know that the total migration is roughly around 2,400 kilometers. So that you can do some maths there to figure that out. And we set these tags to record wet dry data too, to get at sort of behavior along the migration. Again, I'll walk you through this plot. So this is colored by the proportion of the birds that were completely dry during a 1 hour period. So they never interacted with the water. So if it's really red, that means all of the birds that we tagged didn't land or touch water during this hour chunk throughout the day. And so what this graph is telling you, and these vertical lines are saying when roughly the population has fledged all their chicks, and then on the other side in June, when roughly most of the birds have laid their eggs, so when breeding has started happening. So you can see during the breeding season, these birds are spending almost all of their time on land during the night. So they're roosting at their sites or potentially brooding or incubating their eggs. And then during the day, during the breeding season, they spend some of their time on the water, but once migration occurs, or once they're in their winter residency areas, they're virtually not on land at all. They're pretty much in the water constantly. And the question about how often they spend flying throughout the day. So we do see these periods, particularly in the spring when birds are traveling back south, where we have some instances where they're completely out of the water, or some of the birds are actually completely out of the water for an hour period. So these likely represent that intense migration south that's occurring sometime in late March, these little spikes that you're seeing here. There's a lot to unpack with this figure. That's sort of a snapshot of it, but basically what it's saying is that so yeah, during the breeding season, during the dark hours, they're on land, and then these periods where they're dry during the non-breeding season at night are actually likely when they're just resting on the water. So it's been shown in other studies where things like puffins will actually tuck their legs up into their body when they're resting on the water, and so you actually get a false reading of dry because they're so good at keeping their legs dry when they're sleeping on the water. So these periods at night that are dry are likely birds that are just sleeping on the surface of the water. And this work was mostly, so we've been also tagging Cassin's auklets and rhinoceros auklets as well from this population. And you can see these two figures here, the Pigeon Guillemots are doing something completely different than the other alcids at this colony. So Cassins are remaining pretty close to the Farallones throughout the winter. Rhinoceros auklets tend to move south a bit towards Southern California and Baja. So this is pretty, interesting behavior that these Guillemots are exhibiting. And it also shows that they're going to face different threats during the winter months compared to some of these other species. So this work was actually funded to get at how risky their winter movements are, put them in terms of potential risk to being exposed to oil spills. So, the Farallon Islands is located pretty close to a major shipping port. Lots of vessel traffic comes in and out of San Francisco Bay. So we know they're highly vulnerable to potential oil spills in the summer. And these new tagging data are telling us that potentially, different species are going to have different exposure risks during those non-breeding periods. So we're trying to develop a predictive model to look at using vessel tracking data and proximity to major ports. What are the risks? What's the potential oil spill risk along the coast, and then overlap that with these seabird distributions to get at how vulnerable they are to a future oil spill. So that work is ongoing. And I kind of have to mention that because that's why this project was funded, but we really just wanted to look at what they did in the winter. So, okay, and finally, one last thing, we're starting to put GPS tags for summer foraging trip data. So these are actually just taped to the back feathers of the birds, and they only stay on for maybe 5 days. Again, this is a Cassins on the right, but we have a Pigu here on the left wearing one of our GPS tags. And this is a wooden nest box that we monitor. And these are great because they actually can upload their data to a UHF, through UHF to a base station, and we could just download them remotely. So we don't actually have to get the tag back. So it's actually pretty difficult to recapture these birds once the chicks are old enough to be left alone. So they're not spending much time at the site. And just really quickly, these are some pilot data for that. These are just simple tracks. So far, we put out 6 tags this summer, and we got 5 to collect data, and 3 were actually recovered, which is pretty cool. And these are just showing roughly where they're going when foraging for their chicks, and it shows that they're staying. Each one of these concentric circles is 2 kilometers, so it's showing that they're staying pretty close within 8 kilometers of the island when they're provisioning their chicks. And this is all preliminary, so there's a lot more to tease apart with these data. But I just wanted to let you all know that it's happening. Yeah, so what else can the PGUs tell us? These are some future questions that we'd like to explore. We want to look at coupling our diet watches with our GPS tag data to see if we can figure out where they're finding the sculpin, where they're finding the juvenile rockfish, identifying any important hotspots around the island that might need protecting. And then, we'd really love to collaborate with other groups throughout their range to deploy geolocators and GPS tags to do more of a range-wide comparative study about, are our birds on Cepheid representative of migratory behavior, or is it a very special behavior only shown in this, particular region in California? Okay, that's all I have. Hopefully that was informative, maybe not too long. So thanks again, you guys, for inviting me to join your group. And I'm in the area, and if you need help with surveys, I'm going to have to reach out because I also like PGUs. So thanks again.
Thanks so much, Mike. That was excellent. Really, really exciting stuff. I imagine that there's going to be a few questions. Hopefully you're up for answering a couple.
Yeah.
All right. Folks, I didn't really go over what the best way to do this is. I think it's totally legitimate to just unmute yourself and ask a question. But if you want to type a question into the chat too, I'm happy to ask, or Mike can probably look at it too, either way. Anyone have anything? I have a question. You said raft counts. I'm just assuming it's literally a count of the birds that are rafted up around the island. Is that right?
Yeah. So they tend to stay within maybe a mile or so in the spring. They all kind of gather in these big groups around the island. And so we just basically with binoculars and scope just kind of scan 360 with a clicker and just count all the birds that we see. Yeah.
Great.
One thing I did mention was we used to do evening counts, which produce much lower counts than our recent morning counts, which we started, I think, in 2000-ish or so. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Hey, Mike. Mike, this is Govinda from Whidbey Island. Great presentation, very informative. The question that I have for you is, and maybe you'd mentioned this and I had missed it. I'm also trying to kind of cook dinner a little bit, but geolocators that you did on the Paigus, what was your sample size on those fancy little thingamajigs?
Yeah, we did 3 years of tagging and 30 tags per year, so a total of 90. And they run at about, I think it's like $120 these days. So they're actually pretty inexpensive. We had a pretty small budget. So geolocators are a good fit for small budgets.
Cool. And then maybe just a follow-up question. It was interesting that you guys were painting or marking the burrows. And I wonder if that would alert any predators that like, hey, Paigu is right here, or is it just because the gulls are the predators and they're just dumb enough that they're just easy pickings when the chicks come out or whatever?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we ever actually looked at. I mean, the markings are usually, they're not necessarily on top of the crevice. Sometimes it's like an arrow pointing to where the crevice is, and there's quite a few markings on the hillside. So I'm not sure a predator would be able to cue in on that pattern. And I did forget to mention that we do have peregrine falcons on the island, which will take adults as well. I didn't say that. And often, I don't know if this is anecdotal, but it is anecdotal, but we had, I think, 3 of our geolocator birds were found dead, killed by peregrine falcons. So perhaps the jewelry that we're putting on their legs, they could potentially cue in on that as well. So.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
There's a few questions, also a comment from Terrence from Nisqually Reach Nature Center. He was talking about Dr. Sarah Converse, who's one of our collaborators, one of the people that's really helped with our work, is doing that on Protection Island, is using these, they're GPS tags. So similar situation. And people were asking about using geolocators with Pigeon Guillemots in the Salish Sea. It's not really something that's cooked into our protocol, and not necessarily something that we'd be doing, as part of the breeding bird survey. There's certainly room for it, and it would certainly answer lots of questions. I think that, I think Sarah might have some thoughts on this in tandem with our work. What I will say is that if people are interested in hearing about what she's up to, she did a presentation for us, I think it was in August, and I have a recording of it. I haven't posted it online because she asked us not to just publicly post it. But if you email me, if folks email me or get in touch, I'm happy to share that. Sorry, Mike, that's not really a question, but.
Oh yeah, thanks for pointing. And we have been talking to Sarah, and we may be collaborating on a project next summer. I actually have a batch of these devices in my fridge staying cool, so we might bring those out to Protection and then repeat this study on Protection. Yeah. One thing that we found too with this work, not too many people have handled adult guillemots for a tagging study, and we've demonstrated that it has pretty much no effect on the hatching success or breeding success of the birds that we followed. So that was a good, reassuring finding that our handling wasn't too disturbing to them. So.
Mike, I have a question about the connectivity of these populations along the West Coast. We know that there are birds that winter in the Vancouver area and Vancouver Island, and we know that our birds disappear pretty much. Do you have any thoughts on the prevalence of Pigeon Guillemots from other areas, like from the Salish Sea, along the Southeast Alaska coast or North BC, besides the ones that you guys have tagged and followed?
Yeah, well, there's really no way to confirm that yet. It's assumed, so there's scattered colonies throughout California, not just on the Farallones, and it's assumed that those birds likely make a northern migration as well. And there have been a few kind of older studies that looked at wing morphology, and it showed that birds on the extreme ends of the range, so birds that are up in Alaska and then in Southern California, tend to have longer wings than birds that are breeding in sort of British Columbia and the more contracted part of their range. And so it could be that birds on the extremes have more of a migratory tendency than birds that are breeding sort of around the BC area.
Right.
But yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's so hard to get to some of these colonies. So yeah, as you all know.
I have a question about people. Maybe I missed it. How many folks are out doing, I guess, because I know there's all sorts of stuff going on there. But on average, what would you say, how many people are on the island doing work throughout a year?
Yeah, so in the seabird season, we start out with 3 people, and then that ramps up to a total of 8 in July. So that's when we have basically all of the species are on eggs or have chicks. So it gets pretty busy. And then in the fall and winter, yeah, the teams are roughly 5 to 7 people. And that's just our Point Blue staff. We also have the Fish and Wildlife Service has a presence occasionally out there to do maintenance work, and we have contractors that come out to do various projects. So it can expand to roughly 20 people, but it generally around 5 to 8.
Cool, thank you. Puts it into perspective, having a lot of birds in kind of a captive audience in one place versus the way that we do things inherently.
Right.
Very, very different. Anybody else have any questions?
Well, Mike, I have another question, only that I've heard about the rat problem on the islands. Is that still an issue, and that it's kind of like a, you know,
Yeah,
a carpet?
that's a big topic, the house mouse eradication project. Yeah. We've passed some major legislative hurdles, or well, the California Coastal Commission has given us the green light, or at least the company we've contracted to do it. So potentially in the next couple of years, that eradication will happen. But yeah, I don't know much about the details of it. I just know it's that's a hot button issue in the Bay Area. So yeah.
Thanks.
But it's like the largest concentration of house mice in the fall. The ground is just literally moving with mice. It's insane.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
I have a question, Mike. Your survey site is very much, like you said, a granite rock out there in the water, and a lot of the areas up and down the coast are more coastal. And here we are in Puget Sound with our erosional bluffs. Do you know of other areas that would be similar to our geologic setting here in Puget Sound area that where they mainly do breed in the bluffs?
In this area? Or?
No, I mean within the range.
Yeah, mostly the Farallones are actually kind of unique in this this offshore island setting. Most of the breeding range-wide occurs on the mainland in these coastal bluff regions. Like there's a decent colony in Santa Barbara that's on a highly erodible bluff, and I don't know too much about the Alaska populations, but I'm assuming they're mostly in sort of the rack that occurs along the shoreline. Yeah. But so yeah, the granite, the setting that we have in the Farallones is definitely, it's special in terms of habitat for them. I think it's definitely different.
Yeah, and they do like areas around like Deception Pass here on Whidbey Island, where it's very rocky, and
right.
A lot of offshore rocks that you see off the Washington, Oregon coast have them. So
right.
We also have been watching ferry docks and other structures where they manage to figure out some way to breed up and under. It's very fun.
There's a story of the colony on Alcatraz in San Francisco. There's a pair that breeds on a crane boom that goes up and down to load gear on one of the boats. So it actually rides the boom. It's basically anywhere they can find, I guess. Yeah.
And we've watched them ride the ferries here. And I remember going to Haida Gwaii and taking one of the little ferries across there, and the skipper of the ferry was telling me that they breed in the ferry and go back.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining us tonight. This is really, really lovely. Really awesome presentation. Really great to hear about all the work you're doing. Thank you for doing all the work too. Yeah,
it's also fun.
It's excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
And welcome to the Pacific Northwest. Hopefully we'll get you out on the beach. Get in touch if you want to, joining on the survey. There's not any surveys happening, around Tacoma. Vashon and South Sound kind of, bookend the region. So
all right, well, maybe I found my niche.
Yeah, there we go. Anyway, and thank all of you again for being here. This is what makes this work so special, is having all of you here. So really appreciate it, and thanks again for the great season. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording. As always, you can email questions. guillemotresearch@gmail.com is the email address that I use as the coordinator. So that's always an easy place to send questions. But the folks who manage your surveys as well can always get in touch. we will call it that.
Thank you.